So today on our podcast, we got Nikki and Casey with Oregon Paranormal. Welcome.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, I'm super excited. I got tons of questions for you. But one thing with paranormal, like when people hear paranormal, they automatically go to ghosts. And that's not always the case, right? I mean, that's your paranormal. I mean, so I looked up, this is not like from my head. I looked up on Webster.
This is not from my head.
So the term paranormal refers to phenomena that are beyond the scope of normal scientific understanding or natural law. It encompasses experiences, events, or entities that cannot be explained by conventional science. Paranormal often involves supernatural elements, including ghosts, psychic abilities, UFO sightings, or other occurrences that defy standard logic or reasoning. So that's a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
That's covered under paranormal.
It's a wide network
huge umbrella,
casting.
Yeah. So
sure.
how do you guys? I guess let's start from the beginning. How do you guys form and get into this as far as a group?
I started in 1993. I grew up on a healthy dose of Unsolved Mysteries and In Search of with Leonard Nimoy.
Oh yeah.
And grew up in Southern California, so there was a lot that I was seeing on those shows, and there was no shortage of alleged haunted locations throughout the Southland. So I kind of, at an early age, started investigating these places, not leglegally.
Not
A little bit of
legally.
trespassing here and there.
You know the door was kind of open.
Yeah.
My foot helped it, but
Because I wanted to see, like, is there anything to this that from what I'd been reading and what I'd been seeing on TV?
Yeah.
I ended up picking up two books actually, at a yard sale in my neighborhood. One was The Poltergeist by Dr. William G. Rawl, and ESP Hauntings and Poltergeist, the Parapsychologist's Handbook that was written by Lloyd Auerbach. And those two books kind of solidified the path that I ended up taking.
And those were like written back in like the 60s, right?
The Poltergeist, I believe, was late 60s, early 70s.
Yeah.
And I want to say 1982 or 83 was when ESP Hauntings and Poltergeist came out.
Okay. So that got the ball rolling for you.
Yeah.
And then some of the TV mystery stuff, and then it just kind of. I mean, how does a paranormal company, or do you call it a company, or is it more like an organization?
It's kind of like a club, I guess.
club?
Yeah, I mean, I guess it would be an organization.
Yeah.
Just, with a bunch of people that share the same interests. They want to
interest.
find out, the what, the why, the when, the hows.
Yeah.
And just kind of go from there. It's been an interesting path, but when it's a lot different when you're investigating it as a single person versus starting an organization. Scott and I had a shared interest in it. We talked a lot about it during our breaks because we worked in adjacent buildings back in high school. So during our breaks, we would just chat about the paranormal, and we said, "Oh, hey, it'd be really rad to start a group one of these days and start investigating." And then fast forward like 15, almost 20 years later, and we actually followed through with it.
Wow.
So it's been interesting because we had no idea the first part of, starting anything like this, but it essentially was a year of prep, building forums, building a website, some sort of a web presence. And then once we launched the website and all that stuff, we started slowly getting emails and kind of the ball was rolling at that point.
Okay. And Nikki, how did you get into it?
Same. I was a internally creepy kid, I guess. I loved all the ghost stories and movies and, Are You Afraid of the Darks on TV?
I used to love that.
Mm-hmm.
This is like nostalgic hearing all of these.
I had a wonderful woman in my life that would tell me scary stories of old homes she used to live in when she lived in like Idaho, and I would just eat them up. And then it wasn't until I was a little older that I realized, oh, there's events for this. I'm going to go to them, right? And met some of my best friends through there and made connections, started investigating these locations. And so then when I made the trek up to Oregon, I sought the same community because it's such a tight-knit community. And that's how I stumbled upon Oregon Paranormal, and which has been amazing because it fills this need of this interest that you want to know more about, but the only way to know more about it is to personally research it. And so being in an organization like Oregon Paranormal, you get to actually do that real-time research while helping others as well. So
Walk us through like how an investigation starts. I mean, does it? I think you mentioned that. I mean, it comes through different ways, like a phone call, an email, through social media, and then how do you take it from there? And then how do you validate it from each step to continue forward?
So once we have the initial phone call or email, we chat with the client, kind of see what's going on, feel them out. And then we will interview them. We'll go out, interview them with video camera and some audio equipment. We're taking notes the whole time. And what we're trying to do during the interview process is we're trying to, because a lot of times you're writing a lot of stuff down, you're not paying attention to the client and their mannerisms. So we're trying to kind of figure out, are there certain questions that they're being a little dodgy on? Are there certain questions they seem really uncomfortable with? So that we can readdress those questions later. And that's why we will video the initial interview. A lot of times it helps when we're dealing with somebody who's being a little bit more deceptive, but then it also helps in cases where somebody's still not quite comfortable enough to share certain pieces of information that could be pertinent to the case. Once we have all that information, we take it to the core team, we discuss it, we figure out whether or not it's something that warrants a full-scale case study, because those can take anywhere from 6 to 8 months. Or is it simply just consulting with them for a couple weeks and kind of looking for natural explanations to what it is they're experiencing? So there's a couple different avenues that we can take when we're looking at the beginnings of a case study.
Do you feel like you can weed people out pretty quickly if they're being deceptive, or if there's like...
Sometimes we can, and other times it takes a few more visits before we can kind of reach that. A lot of times we find out that they're really into the TV shows, or they're really into horror movies, so they're very heavily influenced by that, or they're heavily influenced by something that they heard from a friend, or they have, those instances where they go to a party and there's a Ouija board, and now all of a sudden they've got a string of bad luck. So now they're blaming the session with the Ouija board and all that stuff. So
they're like, it followed me.
So a lot of times you're almost like a counselor to these people. And luckily with Scott, who's the person I found the group with, he has that counseling background. He used to work for Dornbecker's. He was a school counselor, and then he also worked for Suicide Hotline for suicide prevention. So he's got a lot of tools in his bag that he brings to the team that help with those kind of cases and really kind of connecting with the individuals that we're working with.
So the deception could be they're trying to pull one over on you guys, and they want to say they had a paranormal team out to their house, and but it could also be they're not comfortable explaining what's really going on, or they're not really ready to get to a certain level with you guys, and so that could also be a deception.
Yeah, and a lot of times the deception could just be read as deception, and more so they just don't know how to articulate what is going on in the house, and they just don't understand it. So not necessarily saying that every client is like that, because it's very rare that we run into somebody that's trying to be deceiving. It was more so when we didn't have a lot more checks and balances in place in the early days. Now I think with the forms that we have and the questions that we ask, we're able to kind of weed those cases out before they start.
So the cases that you end up going to, is it all historic buildings, houses, or is it like this house was just built last year? What's going on here?
It can be anything.
Really?
In what we've learned over the years, somebody could die in California, and for some reason they're haunting a house in Oregon, for example. There doesn't seem to be kind of an end-all be-all as far as like what types of buildings or pieces of land can be haunted. It's all a case-by-case basis.
There's like no boundaries.
So with that, what has happened with you as far as, because you've had a long history of doing this, there's got to be some sort of validation going forward to continue it. What's happened with you that's like, I need to stick with this?
Yeah, it's interesting because sometimes we joke because what we do is very boring. It's not like you see on the TV shows where things are happening here and there all the time. A lot of times it's just sitting and observing a location almost. And I liken it to the scene in Poltergeist when they bring the parapsychologist in and they set up in the living room and they're just sitting monitoring equipment. A lot of times that's what we're doing. We're not investigating in the dark because traditionally humans make horrible observers when the lights are turned out.
Yeah.
And when we're trying to observe something visually, it just doesn't make sense. It fills seats for TV shows, but in reality, we need to be able to see. And there are cases where we'll have to attempt to recreate the environment, and sometimes things happen while people are sleeping, so we'll have the lights off and whatnot. But I completely forgot where I was going with this
No,
because
yeah,
of the question. But there's so many different things that we have to look at.
Yeah. So it doesn't always happen right at the stroke of midnight, is what you're saying.
No, it can happen during the day
Yeah.
with the lights on, with the sun out. There's really no pattern unless you're dealing with a situation where it's a potential haunting. And a haunting, the TV shows refer to it as like a residual. Hauntings are basically, for whatever reason, an event that's recorded itself on a piece of property. A lot of times it's associated with anniversaries, birthdays, deaths, and times, and it'll happen for whatever reason on those dates.
Interesting.
But we're not dealing with the afterlife at that point. What we're dealing with is people of the living, for whatever reason at that point in time, left an impression on the property. We've heard of cases where somebody is walking down the hallway in their house and they've walked past themselves going the opposite direction.
Wait, what?
Yeah. It's very bizarre.
And you've ran into this more than once, then? I'm assuming.
We haven't ran into it personally.
Yeah.
Lloyd Auerbach, one of our friends and colleagues, he's run into that quite a few times in his career.
So do you think it's like almost like when you're tuning in a radio and you're sitting in between the stations, you get that bleed over from the next station over. You can hear it, but
Yeah.
like someone can't hear you on a walkie-talkie, that type of thing.
Yeah, essentially you're picking up almost like a kind of like a window in time, and you're seeing something that happened in the past. It's super bizarre, and it's kind of bonkers to explain, to even talk about.
Yeah, I mean, but like we were talking about, the UFO stuff that's going on, and now they're talking about it in Congress. It's like, okay, this is really getting weird because they're actually openly talking about it in Congress about it. And that's one of the theories, like, well, they're not coming from somewhere else. It's like interdimensional, and it starts getting into like really like.
There's a lot of pretty wacky theories out there, and then like Bigfoot is a dimensional creature that can travel in and out of dimensions, but yet he has no clothes.
It's a way to explain it, I guess. But
Yet he has no clothes.
He's got the tech to go through these dimensional portals, but still has no clothes.
You're like, tell me your ways.
If I was that furry, I wouldn't wear clothes either. Who knows? But yeah, there is some unexplained things that could be scientifically explained, and that's what the whole point of paranormal is. It's not explained yet.
Yeah, and some of the theories behind, like, especially like with hauntings and why it's recording itself for whatever reason on the environment, is why we look at like geological layouts of properties, whether they're on quartz,
releasing some
quartz
gas
in the
that's
ground.
making everybody hallucinate.
There was a movie in the 70s. It was a TV British movie called I think it was called The Stone Tape. And then that spawned this thing called the stone tape theory, which essentially is like when you take like a cassette tape and the magnetics and how you're able to record something on that tape. So they use that kind of stuff as a way to theorize why it's happening.
Okay.
But in reality, we don't really know at this point why it's happening. We just know that in some cases it is happening. So we're trying to figure out what are the environmental factors.
So when, like, maybe this is wrong, but I envision, like, when somebody's reaching out to you, they're saying either I saw something or, like, some sort of dramatic event happened in my home. Like, what's kind of the most common thing that you hear? Or is it just vary so much?
The most common is we're hearing things, we're seeing things are moving around on their own, and then we kind of dissect it from there. We have other cases where Oh, I just had it. It's really early in the morning.
Okay. It's okay.
Oh, I can't remember.
It's okay.
So you said it's possibly tied to a place or things. Could it be tied to the actual person that's in the space? It could be like you're talking about, like coming up from California. This like you may a lady her husband died. All of a sudden she's going from California to Oregon, and she's seen her dead husband here for some reason, or some stuff is moving around. It could be tied to the person itself.
It could be. I use a good example. I lost my dad when I was 6, and that happened when we lived in California. When we moved up to Clackamas, and there was this, when I was dating my wife, right before we moved out, I had old Pioneer stereo. You had to push the power button. It's one of those ones where you push the button and the button stays in. There's no way. It didn't have a remote, and it also didn't have a battery, which powered the memory.
Yeah.
So every time you turned the old receiver on, it was always on 0 on volume.
Yeah.
This particular night, it turned on. I had a 6-disc CD changer that turned on. It was
They all turned
blasting.
on by themselves?
Yeah, it was blasting. I can't remember what song it was, but it was blaring. Didn't think anything of it. I shut it off. About a day or so later, I found out that was the anniversary of my mom and dad's wedding.
Oh.
She's had instances where she had lost the diamond had fallen out of her ring, her wedding ring. She lost it when we lived in California. She found it on the carpet in the hallway of our house in Clackamas.
Oh wow.
Was also a date-driven event. Could it be coincidence? Of course, but there's been enough situations that have been date-driven, at least in my situation, that leads me to believe that there's something going on, and again, also proof that you don't have to necessarily die in one location and be stuck there.
Okay. I have a hard time with dates, so if for some reason something happens when I die, I can't remember the date, so it's
I'll
probably
be
not me.
like, why did this show up 5 days after our anniversary?
That's how it is.
What's the significance of January
That's
6th?
gotta be Brian. That has gotta be
It's
Brian.
got to be. We were married on July 14th, but this is him.
That's funny.
I'm gonna remember that. So thank you. If you try to haunt me later,
Yeah.
I'd be like, you're doing it wrong. Like,
Just leave a note.
I know, just put notes everywhere, like July 14th.
So I was telling you earlier, I used to work at a hospital, doing security and late at night, and like the hospitals got to be haunted. There's so many bodies going through there and suffering and people dying. And you think a hospital is someplace that's comforting and stuff like that, but it's sometimes the opposite. And so working there, I did see some creepy stuff, but I mean, I think going through, because I do like real estate photography, so I go in tons of old houses and shoot them by myself, of course. And there's some weird stuff that's happened with some of those old houses that we see. And
He sent me a video one time of this. Where was? Okay, you're
it
gonna
was
have
downtown. It was downtown Salem. It's a historic house, and with a lot of the historic houses, the people that buy them like to preserve them very historic as far as how they decorate them. And so, of course, you walk in and there's like little porcelain dolls everywhere. It's like, I'm by myself, like, great. I gotta look
That's
at this
just
thing.
creepy to begin with. I mean, let's just put that out there.
So I'm being funny. I'm trying to like record one of these. It's in a baby carriage.
Yeah.
And it's just kind of looking up at me like, this looks really creepy. I gotta show Carrie this. So I'm like videotaping, like getting closer to it because I'm gonna try to scare her with it. So I'm getting closer to it, and over on my right side, I hear like this growling sound, and
It's like this guttural growl.
and it happened on video. I was like, oh, like that. And so it made my camera shake. And then we played it back really slowly, and you could hear like this low thing happening right when we slowed the video.
So it's
down.
like as it's zooming in, he's getting closer. All of a sudden, you hear just this, and then it shuts
That's
off. Like
interesting.
Brian, like
scared the crap out of
I
me.
have never gotten a phone call, and he's like, "Oh my gosh, you're not gonna believe what just happened." Did you go back in and finish shooting that?
I had to finish, but I mean, I was like looking around the corners before I go. I didn't just blindly go into our room. I was like, I did a little
Right.
peek and go.
I was like, I have to find the video because we actually have the video, and you can literally hear the growling noise like right at the end.
Yeah.
Interesting.
So yeah,
So yeah,
it's a haunted doll.
It's like
So.
I was trying to be funny about it, and whatever there didn't like that me being trying to be funny about
Right,
it, and so
right.
it proved a point. So
I remembered that train of thought when we were talking about the different types of cases, or what the normal the regular claims are.
Yeah.
Other ones are suicide cases. They've done a number of those ones. But you think like when going back to your job at the hospital and stuff, and you're dealing with a building that's experienced a lot of trauma and a lot of emotion gets released, whether it's through tragic death or sickness and whatnot for whatever reason. I would imagine something's going to linger after that, and especially when it's something that's almost a constant at a building like a hospital or trying to think of like or
psychiatric.
Like psychiatric.
Across the street they have like the Oregon State Hospital for like psychiatric stuff, and it's beautiful building. They've restored that thing. But
Damish when it used to be in Woodburn was another place that had a lot of claims of activity, and can only imagine the stuff that went on there, the stuff that would have gone on at the Fairview Training Center back when that was there in the Salem.
Yeah, he worked there until it closed.
Wow.
Yeah.
So a lot of weird stuff. And people don't think about Oregon as like this like haunted state. They think it's totally fresh and new, and nothing could be like that. But it happens everywhere, and there's always a history. There's a history with every culture of like ghosts or like unexplained things happening.
Yeah.
Tell us about you mentioned earlier that not everything happens at midnight, and that our senses are kind of heightened. Naturally, just because of predators and stuff
especially nowadays. Yeah,
we get that. Not modern day like predators, but like people like dodging wolves and stuff like that. At midnight, our eyesight's not great. Our hearing gets super heightened, so we pick up little tiny noises throughout the house, and so everything is like goes to your gut, and you're like, I'm in danger somehow because I heard this noise, or I can't see over here, but I see a shape moving, and my mind's projecting like there's a face there.
Yeah.
And it's interesting how our brains kind of like form like faces and like things that are not there, and then you're like, did I see that? Did I not see that?
Yeah. Well, going back to like the COVID era, the first year of the pandemic, we like got an influx of phone calls, and
because everybody's home all the time.
Yeah. Usually it was we would only get them in October. From like October to January was our really busy season because a lot of people spend more time in their houses. Yeah. But now during COVID, that's all we were doing. So people were jumping at every little noise that they weren't used to, even like when they're sitting in their house during the day and they hear like the floor creak or
the furnace kick on.
A pipe would that's not belted down in the wall starts to vibrate, and they would call us. Yeah. So it was interesting to see. It was a kind of an interesting little experiment to see like how people were extrapolating the information that they were getting. Yeah, being home all the time,
and then they're trapped in their house.
Yeah,
for days or weeks on end because they don't want to go outside, and so that even heightens it probably even more. It's your mind starts playing tricks on you.
Yeah, and then couple that with the people that are really into the paranormal shows, their mind, the seeds planted, they all of a sudden think that there's something going on, and that of course the next thing that they jump to is like, oh, I've got some sort of a demonic force at play in my house, and it's the furnace.
Yeah. So when my grandma was passing away, this would be 2018. My grandpa passed away when I was, I was in 8th grade. So it must have been like 13, 14. His name was Elwood. Everybody called him Woody. So my grandma passed away in 2018. I'm a realtor. As she's in the hospital, I get this call from someone who says, we need to list this home because they want to purchase another home I have listed. It's like, okay. And they're like, I said, what's the address? And it's like, I can't remember the house number, but it was on Elwood Street. And it's like, well, that's interesting. And so there is a realtor in town. His name is Woody Woods. I haven't talked to this man in years. And literally, as my grandma is taking her final breath, I get this phone call from Woody Woods, which my grandpa, we all called him Woody. And so I remember standing there with my mom and my aunt, and all of a sudden my phone's ringing, and I go to silence it, and it says Woody Woods on it. Took a screenshot really quick, and I'm like, Mom, Grandpa's calling. And then I get this text message saying, we'd like to go ahead and view your listing on Elwood. And we're like, holy crap. We're like, all right, Grandpa, we get it. Sort of thing.
Weird how those kind of things happen.
It was the crazy. So we joke about this all the time. We're like, okay, Grandpa called us when Grandma was ready to go, sort of thing. And then the weirdest thing was I think it was an hour or two later, he messaged. He's like, "Hey, I'm really sorry. We weren't even looking in this area. This was so far out of where my client was even looking for a home. We're not going to come. So just go ahead and cancel the showing." And I'm like, "Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Great.
Will do.
It's okay. Yeah, not a problem." So we always joke about when Grandma passed away. Grandpa called to be like, "Time to go."
I'm good.
And it's almost
Maybe
like those
so
things
that
happen at those instances as a way of comforting the people that are
It really
losing,
was. Yeah.
losing the loved ones.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of emotion that comes into, especially when someone's like, they're passing away, and they're there in the room with you, and family members start showing up that maybe haven't been around each other for a long time, and everybody and all that emotion is building up in that room.
Oh
Yeah.
yeah, for sure.
So I mean, there's got to be something that's could be causing some of that stuff to happen.
Yeah.
Well, and then my uncle shows up and he's like, "You're not going to believe it." He's like, "I'm driving down the road and there's this big, like, Woody's tree service that I get behind." I was like, "I got to one up you here, right, buddy?"
Yeah.
So, it was just kind of comforting though. But
It kind of reminds me of like when I go car shopping, for example, and you've got like a specific car in mind, and then all of a sudden you start seeing that car everywhere you're
reticular
at.
activator.
Yeah.
Okay, so I had never heard that phrase before, and then someone we know was telling us about reticular activation. I was like, "What are you talking about?" And then she uses, I think, like a yellow slug bug or something like that as like an analogy.
Yeah.
And so she starts explaining that, and I'm like, "Oh my gosh, that's a thing."
Yeah,
So,
yeah, and you figure that same thing happens when we're dealing with the loss of a loved one.
Yeah.
You start looking for these signs.
We got questions.
We got questions.
Sorry.
Oh, we got questions. All right. So it's Lafayette Cemetery checking in,
Check it out.
or check it out. I thought Lafayette Cemetery was checking in.
The
Okay.
cemetery's checking into the podcast.
So Lafayette Cemetery. You guys ever been in there?
I'm very aware of the lore surrounding
there's
the
lore with it.
Lafayette
Oh.
Cemetery. I wish Jay was here. Jay's our director of historical research, and he's done like extensive research in that area. But there was supposedly, and I could be completely butchering the story, but that there's a witch that put a curse on the town or something along those lines.
Like the town of Lafayette?
And, yeah, and that she still lingers there, and supposedly there's a tree, I think, on property of the cemetery where she was hung.
Oh, wow.
A lot of the information that we've dug up, there's nothing to back that claim up, unfortunately.
Okay.
But it is one of the famous hotspots in the Pacific Northwest.
Interesting. Hung in a cemetery.
I had an uncle actually who owned a house in Lafayette, right at the end of the drag on the left-hand side of the road, and there was some stuff that was going on in that house for sure. So there's definitely some areas in Lafayette that I know are active, but I don't know about the cemetery.
Yeah, usually like with real estate, you want to have a cemetery as your neighbor because it's usually the quietest.
Quietest,
place.
yeah.
Wah, wah.
But I mean, she gets that with real estate. It's like, I mean, if someone like commits suicide or dies in a house, that has to be like disclosed, doesn't it? Doesn't?
Does not have
It's
to be disclosed.
different state to state.
Yeah, it differs state to state.
Really?
Yep.
Why? What is that?
I don't know the answer to that question.
And I believe I've got a friend who's a realtor, and she told me as long as it doesn't affect the
Like
the
material.
form or function of the house, it does not have to be disclosed. And I only know this because the house directly across the street from my house experienced a suicide case that I didn't witness it, but I heard it happen. And so that we actually got an email or text message from our neighbors at one point. So it was kind of the dirty secret in the neighborhood that the new owners, that information was never disclosed to them. So we felt super bad about not disclosing it. But I get this text message at like 10 o'clock at night one day, and it's like, "Hey, Casey, did somebody die in my house?" And I looked at my wife, and I showed her the text, and her eyes got big. And so we had them come over, and we told them what happened. And coincidentally, before they moved in, the old neighbors gave us access to the house to do an investigation. We didn't pick up anything in our time there. But several years later, weirdly enough, my wife and I, it was a warm summer night in September. We're out there. I've got a beer and she's got one, and we're just kind of BSing like we usually do. And I stopped in mid sentence, and she's still talking, and you can see me because I've got a Ring camera, and you can see me focusing in on something, and I kind of turn my head like I'm listening to something. What I was hearing was the exact sounds that I heard the night that he hung himself.
Oh, wow.
And because that never leaves somebody once you hear the sound of somebody choking. And when I originally heard it, I thought somebody was getting sick. So when I was listening to it on the porch several years after it happened, I told my wife, I was like, oh, so-and-so must be getting really sick right now, because their bathroom's right above the front door and the window was open. She's like, they're gone for the weekend. And that's kind of when it clicked. So the next day I marked everything down on paper that night. The next day I went into my records from when we did the case study, and that was the night that he completed suicide. Was it something that triggered something in my subconscious to remember the events of that night?
Mm-hmm. I got to send
Or
a chill.
was it actually paranormal?
That's,
We
I
don't
got to
know.
send a chill up your spine when she told you that.
It's interesting, yeah.
Wow.
And again, a perfect example of a date-driven event.
So do people ever come to you saying like, yeah, like I think of like paranormal or something like that where people come trying to communicate with people like on the other side sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
Do you guys get that? Like people asking for that, or are they looking for like validation that something's actually going on?
It's more on the validation side. Sometimes we'll get a call like that, and we've got friends that do mediumship and psychic work and stuff like that.
That was the word I was looking for. Yeah.
And we'll usually forward them to them and see if maybe they can help.
Is that something you try to keep separate so you can kind of almost not like taint your investigation with other things that are kind of outside?
Yeah, usually if we bring in a medium for anything, they're brought in separately from the investigative team. They'll write down their impressions on a sheet of paper, and usually it gets sealed in an envelope, and then we kind of set it off to the side, and we won't look at that information until after
Because
the
you don't
case
want
study.
that to come into what you're doing.
Yeah.
Got it.
And we haven't worked too much with psychics and mediums and whatnot, but it's not completely off the table. It's solely on the request of the client, whether or not they bring them in or not.
It's hard to be totally completely like down the middle as far as like I'm going to approach this with an open mind and I'm not going to have any preconceived notions. But everybody, even like scientists, have they go when they go into and they do like some sort of like study or they're writing a paper.
Yeah.
There's a little bit of what they really believe that comes out in whatever they're writing, I think.
Yeah, it's really difficult to stay completely biased on a case.
Yeah.
I see it on Facebook all the time. We follow a bunch of different groups throughout the Pacific Northwest and the U.S. And one of the trends that we see is we've got this case coming up. I can't wait to see what kind of evidence we pull out of it. And so that tells me they've already tainted the investigation because they've already set an expectation that they're going to get something.
So you see this old mansion, all of a sudden there's a thunderstorm happening. It's like, this place is definitely haunted. That's what you're thinking. It's like, look at this place. This is scaring the crap out of me just looking at this place. And so you're going to come into it like, okay, now you got to work backwards. Like, okay, how can I like debunk that this is?
Yeah, and there's a lot of like histrionics that goes on with case studies too. Is a lot of times paranormal groups will heavily rely on the historical information, and history isn't always correct, and especially when it comes to like haunted locations, sometimes that history can be muddied, and so we try not to let that information kind of muddy the investigation or the case study, because we might have information on the place that has nothing to do with what's going on there. So it's very easy to go down the wrong rabbit hole.
And is that where like when someone's telling you, here's what's happening, it almost you don't want them to tell you what's happening so you can find it on your own or find something else that's going on?
Well, we definitely want to know what the claims are and where the claims happen within the location. We also want to get several different witness statements. And so like during the interview process, when we're interviewing people about a particular location, we interview them at separate times because we've learned over time when you're interviewing everybody in the same room, everybody's leading the other person. So we want
Like
to get...
oh yeah, I remember. Oh yeah, don't you remember? Okay.
Yeah, so we always want to get as honest of an account as possible from each person that's experienced something to see if there's any variables that may be lying within the two stories.
Yeah.
And that's another reason why we look at like medical history and things like that with clients, because we want to find out, is there any psychological trauma? Are they taking any prescription drugs that could hinder certain senses? It could cause hallucinations, things like that.
Yeah.
And that's another reason why Scott is such a great asset to the team, is not only does he have that counseling background, is now he's a physician. So that really helps as well. And in the past, we've also reached out to nurses and other doctors to say, hey, we've got this client, they've got these prescriptions. Is there a possibility that this dose does not gel well with this one and whatnot?
No, it's a hard line to balance, because you want to believe people are being honest and with what they're telling you, and they also don't want to think, well, they're going to hear about my medical history and they're not going to believe me based on my medical history.
Sure, yeah, and that goes in with like when we get a phone call and said, I've got a demon. It's like, well, okay, I want you to get a psychological evaluation and a medical evaluation from a physician and maybe some sort of a psych eval. And then once we can see that data, then we'll start looking at those other claims that you say might be demonic, because 9 times out of 10, it's
Psychological.
it's more psychological than it is or medical. My colleague Ben had a case where the lady was adamant that things were happening to her. She was experiencing all sorts of things across the spectrum, visual manifestations, voices, the feeling of touch, and nobody else in the house was experiencing that stuff. He suggested that she be examined by a medical doctor. They ran some tests. They found out that she had a tumor that was, I think, benign, but was pressing on the brainstem. And that's what ended up causing a lot of her hallucinations.
Wow.
She got treatment, and those hallucinations started to go away. So those are things that we kind of look at before we can even start to flirt with the idea that we might be dealing with something paranormal.
That's where that 6 to 8 months of investigation, probably before, that's probably like the first 5 months is just validating that this person is actually experiencing something before you even go in. What is like what do you say is like your percentage of like, this is something that's psychological, this is something that's happening that's in the house, it could be like a mouse, or the house is settling or something like that, it's environmental, so this is something that we've picked up and we can't explain either?
Oh man, I would say that about 98 to 99% of the cases that we've worked, there ends up being a natural explanation to this, that, or the other.
That's a high stat.
It really is. That's why we have to be so picky with the cases that we handle, because it takes so much of our time and the client's time. We want to make sure that the cases that we're going after might yield some results, which is difficult.
Yeah.
Because the paranormal doesn't perform on cue.
Yeah.
So that's why 6 to 8 months, but we're also returning to the location for several investigations over that 6 to 8 months.
That's got to be tough for your team members. So I think you have to approach it a certain way. It's like a fisherman going out and never catching a fish.
Yeah.
But you just like to be there.
Yeah.
And throw the pole.
One day.
Yeah, one day something might happen. So it's a hard thing to overcome as far as like mentally when you're going into something, because naturally people want to see a result.
Yeah.
Either your client wants to see, I want you to validate what I'm experiencing.
Or explain it.
And I don't want to hear anything else being it's about the house or anything. I want you to tell me what I'm doing is real.
Yeah.
Or your team member's like, eventually I want to be able to see something that I can't explain that blows my mind. And then you're constantly going and trying and doing something, but you're doing it in a way to just come up with an answer.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a frustrating industry, I guess you would call it, to be in, because it doesn't always garner results. But there are those instances where we do come across a case where we get something on audio or on video, or we have an experience in real time, And that's what recharges the batteries. And that's why we do what we do. We're reminded, oh yeah, sometimes stuff does happen.
It's like the white whale.
Explain to us what type of things you guys have actually picked up on audio and video.
He like points at her right away. He's like, go.
I've been doing all the talking.
Voices on audio I've gotten before even I've been part of Oregon Paranormal. And in real time, you don't hear anything usually, but then you go back and listen and you're like, oh my gosh, I caught a glimpse, of my white whale. So I got to keep going. I'm trying to think now.
Does it come across as like whispers, or is it like completely like this sound like we should have heard this at the time, but for some reason we didn't hear that?
Sometimes you'll catch whispers, but sometimes you'll catch a full word, or it's like someone should be standing next to you or behind you or even just outside the door saying something, and you're like, how did I not hear that in real time? If you've made your parameters secure enough so there's no way anyone else could be there. So you have this experience that you can't explain, but that was the point why you were there in the first place. So and those are the things that light your fire to keep doing the next one, to keep doing the hours upon hours of research for nothing, to get that next little moment of evidence for this research project.
Yeah.
Well, and I didn't realize we were talking about earlier. I was asking like, what do you guys typically charge? And you're like, we don't charge anything.
Yeah, it's internally funded. Most groups are internally funded, and it gets really expensive, especially because we want to have if we do pull a piece of data that we can say definitively is a piece of evidence, we don't want it to look like Bigfoot footage, which is always blurry.
Yeah.
Or the blurry,
like
out
the
of
shadow
focus,
over here. I promise this what
UFO
it is.
photos.
Yeah.
We want to have something that's nice. So all of our audio recorders are Zoom high definition audio. We're able to place those audio recorders throughout a location, get real crisp audio. The same goes for video. We don't want to have, standard definition or whatnot. So the DVR systems that we have, it's 4K video on an 8-camera system that also have onboard audio for each camera. We're working on a documentary right now up in Port Gamble, Washington, at a very well-known haunted location called the Walker Ames House. And a couple months back, we had been filming for the show, and we kind of moved in as residents for 2 or 3 days in this house. And it was me and Ben Robison of Washington Paranormal. And I had my cot set up in one of the second story. I was thinking it was the second story master bedroom. And Ben was in the room adjacent to me right by the staircase, had all the cameras set up, and it had been rolling for several days. This coincidentally was the last night that we were going to be in the house. And earlier in the evening, it seemed like something kind of woke up in the house, it seemed. And we've spent a lot of time in this house over the years. And we finally called it a night pretty early because we were going to head out first thing in the morning on Sunday. And it's around midnight, and we started hearing noises. And it sounded like, at least to me, it sounded like knocking. And it happened a series of, I think, like 7 or 8 times throughout from 12:30 to about 4 in the morning. And the difficult part is, we're in a alleged haunted house, but we also have to think of the outside factors. We know it's a haunted house. A lot of people in the Pacific Northwest know it's a haunted house. So it's a hot spot for people to come and check out. So was it a spirit trying to get our attention, or was it somebody knocking knowing that we were there that night that was screwing with us?
Oh, yeah.
So in those instances, we have to kind of reset and go, oh, this is what we need to do differently next time. So next time we go, we're going to set up motion activated trap cameras outside the property and canvas that so that we can rule out any human interaction.
Yeah.
But what was interesting about that case was that We had cameras downstairs and we had cameras up in the attic and then on the second story. Each of the cameras has an onboard microphone. So the camera that was in my room, and you can see me sleeping on frame, that captured the knocking. The downfall, or the unfortunate part, was we didn't have a camera on Ben. So if we were to say, hey, we're going to present this as evidence,
Oh, they're going to know. Okay.
we want to
like,
make
"Where's
sure
Ben?"
that Ben's accountable and I'm accountable
Yeah.
before we can start looking at other things. We had a Zoom cameras or a Zoom audio recorder set up in the main hallway of the second story that picked up the knocking crystal clear, very loud. When we reviewed the Tascam audio recorder downstairs, it's very faint. So what tells me is that the knocking was coming from the second story. We checked the camera and the audio recorder up in the attic, again, very faint. For some reason, it seems to be central to the second story. But again, we have to be able to discount the human factor and the fact that we didn't have cameras outside. We're going to have to just chalk it up to an experience.
Yeah.
And hope that we can capture it again at some point in the duration of the documentary.
Which is why cases can last so long,
Yeah.
because you don't want to be like, oh, it's totally haunted. I heard knocking. It's closed, you know, because you don't know. Could it have been a bird? Could it have been an environmental factor, another person outside?
Yeah.
So it's doing all your checks and balances over time to see is this consistent? Is the same experiences happening, or was it a one-off? So we try to be very thorough in research, which is why cases take a long time, because, you know, we're not like the shows of, yes, I heard a thing or I felt a thing, so it's haunted. Well, there's a lot going on in a person and in the environment that can determine otherwise. So we always want to make sure that's part of it.
The hard thing, I think, especially with technology kind of going forward, you trust your equipment, you know how it's going to react to certain things. You present that as evidence online. People are like, no, I don't believe it, because you could have just recreated that. You mentioned like the Bigfoot thing. Like every Bigfoot video is blurry footage from the 70s or 80s or something like that. If I were to like take a high res with my camera of Bigfoot, like it's a guy in a costume. I don't believe you that because it looks too good. It's like it reverses. Now it's totally unbelievable because it looks too well and it's too convincing.
Yeah.
Like,
I mean,
it's AI.
we could have 100, 200 people
Yeah.
filming the same event, and we could present that online, and it would still get scrutinized as being fake. Especially now when you're dealing with the AI technology that's going on. It's so easy to manipulate footage. So a lot of times we'll get like videos and audio that gets sent into us saying, I recorded this, and what do you think? And so we'll take that video and we'll throw it into Adobe Premiere and see if it's been doctored in some way or another, or if it's just information that they're not catching at the time that they're reviewing it, so they want to send it to us for a second look. We deal a lot with like orb videos and things like that, and from like either home Nest cams or Ring cameras, and it's just educating people to certain things that get captured on audio, letting them know about the low noise floor of electronics that we can't hear, but microphones will pick up, infrasound, things like that could cause your eyeball to vibrate. And it's so minute that you're not conscious of it. But because of that, for whether it's, you know, a rushing river by the house or wind, that infrasound is affecting the entire environment.
Oh, interesting.
And so then I found this out a couple years back, but when the eyeball is slightly vibrating because of infrasound, it can cause hallucinations.
Because your eye's trying to interpret what it's seeing. It's not used to like vibrating. So it's like, there's something there. It looks like.
And they can't detect that anything's wrong with them, so they automatically assume that it's a paranormal event going on, and rightly so, because it's not something they've experienced before. So a lot of it is just, you know, educating the public, and in some cases reschooling them or unschooling them from what they've learned on TV shows.
Okay.
Because there's so much misinformation. Some shows get it right, and then there's other shows that are just trying to fill seats.
Yeah.
So
Like,
yeah,
especially with fear, you see it all the time on
Yeah.
the shows. Everything is so scary.
Mm.
It's demonic or it's
Yeah.
an evil. And it's not always that way. It's rarely that way, if ever. So for people that are afraid too to come forward with paranormal experiences because, well, they're going to get scrutinized, but sometimes it is a personal experience and sometimes it's not, but it's not always scary and it doesn't always have to be scary, which I think is the perception a lot of people have.
and
So-
I've been doing this for as long as I have,
Yeah.
and I've never once felt threatened or scared about what it is that I'm experiencing.
And that's what you see on TV a lot. And maybe that's good for TV. I think some of those
Great for the
Yeah.
for the marketers and all the investors and all that. Yeah.
And that's probably why it's you guys are more scrutinized, because there are the ones that go on TV that make a show out of it. They're making money. They've got to show them something.
Mm-hmm.
And so
It's
all
like
of a sudden, I got a
theatrical.
scratch because someone, their nails across my back, and it's like, oh, that's terrifying. If that
Yeah.
were to happen to me.
Yeah.
And so people think that if that's not happening, then it's not real. Or there's people like, look how much they're faking it. So everyone is faking it.
Our director of historical research was on one of those shows, and he was under contract and an NDA with the network for the longest time. And once the NDA was up, he was able to finally spill the beans about and he felt bad. He felt like he was lying to the fans and the public, because there was some shady stuff going on in the production, in the editing bay of the show. And I could only imagine that same nefarious stuff is going on with a lot of the other shows now, because it's like fear sells. The investigating in the dark thing that became a thing when the TV show in the 90s called Sightings came out.
Yep.
That's about the time when you started seeing people investigating in the dark. When you go back to shows like Unsolved Mysteries, where they're showing like footage of the Queen Mary, and you've got parapsychologists from the U.S. William G. Rawl working with a parapsychologist from England, Tony Cornell, and they're both working together on the ship. The lights are on. It's weird. Why didn't they have the lights off? Because fear sells, and that's not what they were selling back then.
Yeah.
They were trying to give you an honest look at what it was that they were doing.
Interesting. Yeah. So ghosts aren't afraid of light.
Ghosts aren't
Yeah.
afraid of light.
They like to turn them on and off. Isn't that what it is?
Yeah. I guess, so what has happened to you specifically in your investigation? Like, this is the craziest one we've ever been on.
There's been two. We did a house in Dallas, Oregon, just outside of Salem.
Yeah.
And it was an old Victorian house. We got called in by this family, husband and wife. Kids were away at college, and they were so freaked out about it that they would go out to the sidewalk to call us, because they didn't want to call us in the house, because they didn't want whatever was there to hear them talking. And they again, I think you're going to think I'm crazy. This is what's going on. They were hearing and seeing the figure of a little girl, and then they were hearing what sounded like a more stern, older gentleman. So they called us in. We did the walkthrough, and this is the first time this has ever happened to me. But we were, like I said, we record and we video. Well, at the time it was videotape. We would video the walkthrough and the interviews and everything. And when we got home that night, Scott and I started going over all the audio. Instantly, we started hearing the voice of a little girl.
Wow.
And it was bizarre. There were no, aside from the client's wife, that was the only female on the property. There were no children, but it was clear as day. It sounded like she was in the room. It was so loud, in fact, that you could actually hear the voice kind of reverberating off some of the smaller walls or some of the smaller rooms.
Like, was she saying things, or what was it that you were hearing?
We were hearing like, "Excuse me, please." Like they were trying to get our attention.
Oh my gosh.
I can't remember what the other things were that she was saying, but there was something definitely there. So fast forward to the investigation. We show up. It was November. It was a super cold night, and we're not even ready to start investigating yet. And I'm setting up the camera still, but I can hear what's going on through the audio because we had the whole place rigged with audio. And I hear Scott go, "What was that? Did you hear that?" And a couple other investigators are like, "Yeah, I heard that." He's like, "It came from upstairs." What they heard was somebody run from one side of the house to the other side. And it was muffled. So you could tell it was on the carpeting.
We've got little kids. We know exactly that
We know
same
exactly
sound.
that
Yeah,
sound.
yeah. It was like, thum, 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 thum. And then you could hear a door close. So immediately they stopped what they were doing and they went up and they started investigating. I finished setting stuff up, and that was one of the only cases that well, there's a small handful of cases, but this one, it's like the Holy Grail. You're dealing with experiences that were happening in real time, and then experiences that were captured on audio and video, which were very interesting. So we were able to validate that there was, in fact, a little girl. We caught her a couple times. We had one of our investigators ask a question: what do you miss the most? And then all of a sudden you hear her say, "Mommy." And it wasn't on just one recorder. It picked it up on 3 different audio devices that night. The same response. We heard her voice again upstairs where she says, "Excuse me, please." And then the audio starts to drop off. You could tell she was saying more stuff, but it was starting to break up. We picked up on one of the cameras, an investigator had just left a flashlight on a chair. The flashlight sat on the chair for about 8 hours. And as we were asking questions in a different room, the flashlight turned on. And I've seen people do the flashlight trick where you loosen the
Yeah. It's a little bit of vibration.
battery.
makes it-
Yeah. We didn't do that. We literally had just forgotten a flashlight on a chair that happened to be on camera.
So it's like a little kid playing with a
Yeah, because
flashlight.
I think it was sitting next to, we brought in an old sock monkey because we'll try and bring in like a trigger object
Not the sock monkeys.
that is close to the time era that
Yeah.
we believe the spirit or person was alive.
Yeah.
And the flashlight happened to be there. It had been sat down there when we were setting down the trigger object. And then, about 7 or 8 hours into the investigation was when the light went off. We had instances where you'd ask for a response, and in the kitchen, we're sitting in the dining room or the living room, and you could hear what sounded like rustling clothes and what sounded like somebody walking around on the floor in the kitchen. So it was like one thing after another. We just kept capturing stuff. It's a fantastic example of why we do what we do.
So were you guys able to look at the chronologically?
Chronological.
Yeah, there's the word of the house and find maybe old photos of like this could have been them, or because you also mentioned there was like a stern old.
Yeah, so we were able to document the old gentleman as well. We couldn't find anything in the historical documents that said this person died on the property or anything like that.
Yeah.
But what we were able to figure out, speculation at least, a couple months after the investigation, they were having a yard sale. This older gentleman came by and he said, "Yeah, I used to live here. My dad built the second story on this house. And shortly after the house was done, he passed away." We can only speculate that maybe that's who is there also. But when we were doing audio sessions addressing the little girl, we heard the voice of an older man say, "Just leave her alone." So we didn't feel threatened.
Yeah.
But what was really cool and the outcome of this investigation was the fact that we watched the we watched the client. Like you can see, like when somebody has a weight lifted off their shoulders. We met with them. We had dinner with them. We revealed the data that we pulled and presented them with what we believed to be evidence of their claims. And we even uncovered more audio during the reveal that we didn't catch the first time.
Yeah.
But while we're doing that, we can hear somebody walking, like pacing upstairs. And we can hear the doors opening and closing upstairs. It's never happened to me since. It's just a magical, magical house that I'd love to go back to sometime.
Do they still live there?
I don't know.
I'm like, what happened to the couple?
I don't know.
Okay.
I don't know if they're still together. I know the house sat vacant for a while. I think they had moved to a different state, but then came back. Their daughter follows us on Facebook, and every once in a while will give us updates. So one of these days, hopefully, if they still have the house, we'd love to go back, because I mean, this was in the early days of the group when we didn't have the really nice equipment, the nice audio recorders and the nice cameras and stuff like that. So, and the sensors that we're using now have changed, and that's one of the other things too about the work that we do is and if anybody says that they can tell you what a ghost is made of or anything, they're giving you a line, because there's no quantifiable way for us to detect a ghost. So a lot of the equipment we're using was developed for different industries, whether it's electrical or network engineering or whatnot, and we're using it based on information that we've read about from other parapsychological books of things that are present during an event. So like when we go in and we're like looking at EMF, we're looking at the EMF because we know that that's present, or that's a present factor in an occurrence. Whether or not it's the cause is still
Magnetic
up for debate.
field?
Yeah.
Because everybody puts off a magnetic field. Right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, how do you differentiate our magnetic field to what you're picking up in the room?
So we use a bunch of different devices. A lot of the devices that we have won't pick up. They're not sensitive enough to pick up anything that the human body's putting off. But we'll use what's called the tri-field natural meter that we can set to just magnetic. So what that does is it only reads the 3 poles that the Earth is putting off. It won't pick up on any of the man-made stuff like electrical or any of the radio frequencies that we're bombarded with on a daily basis. That information we'll take and we just kind of jot it down, and if we have an event, hopefully we'll have the data from that and a bunch of other devices that say that something may have happened.
So do you think that the little girl was interacting with you, or is it like almost like you're hearing a monologue between two people and you're picking up that?
In this case, we discounted it as not being a haunting, but as actually being an apparition that we were dealing with. So an apparition, referred to on the TV shows, is an intelligent haunt, which essentially just means that the apparition can interact with you and its environment and is aware that we're there. So those are the times where we're asking like direct questions. We're not asking like, do you know what day it is? We don't want yes or no questions, because it's so easy to misinterpret somebody going like an investigative member saying like, just going like, and then that when you listen back at it, it'll sound like somebody just whispered no. So we're looking for information like specific stuff. What is your name?
Yeah.
What year were you born? Things like that. Things that wouldn't necessarily be just random chatter that we could pick up from like a stray radio signal on one of the audio devices.
Do you think they're always like tuned in, like they're always watching the house, or is it like kind of coming in and out?
I think it's coming in and out. And a good example, there's a movie that came out in the early 2000s called The Others.
I saw that one. That's a good
And
one.
okay, so no spoilers here.
Yeah.
You think you're watching this family dealing with a haunting, but in fact, you're watching the ghosts thinking that they're dealing with a haunting when they're actually dealing with the living. And I can only imagine that might be what's going on in these cases, is that we're getting a snapshot into their realm and they're getting a snapshot into ours, more so probably into ours than we are into theirs.
Their realm is, as far as, do you think it's like time? It's our time and their time, or a whole different, like they're dead, but they're still thinking?
I think that they're on kind of the same plane, but just in a different form. Like, and they talk about like the survival of consciousness after death, after bodily death. One, we can't define what consciousness is just yet, and we may never do that. But in parapsychological circles, it's believed that when the body dies, the consciousness, for whatever reason, in some cases, sticks around. And so when we go into a location, we're interacting with that potential consciousness that didn't evaporate after, bodily death, or didn't go back into the world in a different form of energy.
It's actually, I mean, it could be comforting to some people knowing that, especially if it's, I know my husband died and I'm feeling these things in the house. Help me figure out what's going on.
Yeah.
And maybe you don't come up with a complete answer, but there is enough validation. Like, I hear what you're saying. We picked up something like that.
Mm-hmm.
It's an open book at this point. Because
Yeah.
you said you never really close a case,
No,
right?
never.
So there's always room to kind of go back and figure something out. And
Yeah, and it's great. Not closing a case has been very fruitful for us over the years. Like I said, with this particular case in Dallas, we get update. We used to get periodic updates from the husband and wife, and they would say, "Hey, we heard her," or "Hey, we bought this gift for her and we put it under the Christmas tree." So they've kind of included both of them into their daily life, welcomed them in. A lot of the disturbances have kind of been dialed down. I think that a lot of that has to do with the fact that they're not hyper aware that they're in a house that's haunted, and they've kind of accepted what's going on. So it's really cool. Like I said, when you see that weight get lifted off their shoulders when they're presented with the data that says, "Oh, my claims have been validated."
Like, you're not crazy. These
Right.
things are happening. Yeah.
And
And
you
then
don't
there's-
have to be afraid now,
Yeah,
right?
yeah. And there's unfortunate times where, I mean, we're not going to sugarcoat it. If we go and do a case and we're there for 8 months and we don't pull anything, that's just the nature of what it is we do sometimes. It's like sometimes we don't pull anything, and that could very well be because of the fact that there might not be anything there, and it might literally just be something in the environment in the house, or just noises in general that houses make.
how many cases did you guys say you have?
Because our case studies are so long, we usually do maybe 2 or 3. We try not to do too much because we want to be able to give the clients 100% of our time. And if we're out going and doing an investigation every weekend, you can't give someone 100% of your time.
Yeah.
And because of the fact that when we set up all the equipment, you figure we're setting up anywhere from 6 to 8 cameras, whether it's on a DVR system or static handheld cameras throughout the place. And then we've got audio recorders set up all over the place. And then we're taking photos all over the place.
Yeah.
By the end of just a single evening investigation, we've got probably 100 to 300 gigs of data that we have to now download off of all those devices, upload to a server that all of our investigators can access, and then we have to take a fine-tooth comb and pour through everything. And sometimes we pour through it 2 or 3 times before we're ready to meet with the client again.
Is that something AI or technology as it increases is going to help you or hinder you? Because AI right now, we can take our entire episode and it'll pick it apart and it'll say, this is what topic was talked about. Here's how the people, were when they were talking about it. There's the inflections of their voice when they were speaking about this subject.
They can even do AI with our voice too.
Yeah.
Remember we were hearing about that?
Yeah.
They can take listening to what we're saying here, and
Right.
then it can be
Recreate
into-
your entire face and your AI and your mannerisms.
That's
and you
terrifying.
I'll show Brian a picture. I'm like, oh my gosh, I've never seen this before. I'm like, look how cool. And he's like, it's AI.
Yeah.
I'm like, how do
You've
you
got
know that?
12 fingers and
Yeah. He's like, look at that one little speck of something right here. And I'm like, whatever. Just go away. It was a cool photo.
it's nice to still go through the stuff the old analog way.
Yeah.
But there is software that I know a lot of teams are starting to use where they can throw in DVR footage, for example, and then in seconds, it's just analyzing every little anomaly in a video. Whether or not it's actually picking up anything is another story. But my concern about doing that is that it's going to pick up all this other anomalous stuff, whether it's dust or just pixelation, because the camera can't extrapolate the data in a dark area versus a light area in the frame, that it might actually miss something that the human eye would have caught. And so that's why when we've got everybody going over the data, it's not just one person going over the DVR footage. We have everybody going over the DVR footage, because I can go through it and I might miss something that Nikki saw, or Nikki could miss something that Scott saw. So it's good that everybody has a hand in the data analysis part.
So as you go along, and you say you've been doing this for almost 20 years.
No, a little 20, almost 25, I think.
Wow.
Yeah.
Where do you hope it ends up as far as the whole?
I'm looking forward to the TV craze dying off.
Yeah.
But I think the nice thing about the TV craze is that it's brought it out in the open and people are more open to talk about it.
Mm-hmm.
So that in and of itself is great for the business, because people who used to be afraid to call people like us aren't so afraid to do so now. But I think with technology, especially with like high definition audio, the high definition video, hopefully sensors might become a little more sensitive to what it is we're trying to detect.
Yeah.
I think that's where we're going to start making a little bit more of a breakthrough as far as like the evidence goes. But the concern is that the information that's been collected over the last 100 years through parapsychological groups is going to go to the wayside, and we're just going to have a bunch of people running around in the dark, fulfilling, trying to, re-experience something that they did in the past, or that they had experienced in the past. Because it is a lot of work, and you do see a lot of ghost teams pop up and then they're gone.
Yeah.
Because they realize it's a lot of work.
They just bought something off Amazon. It's like a ghost detection thing, and then all of a sudden they're ghost hunters. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. There's a huge industry for all sorts of silly technology.
So you mentioned that you don't you don't charge people for this stuff.
Yeah.
Obviously, you're having to spend a lot of money on equipment and time involved going. Do you have sponsors or anything that can help? No.
No.
So when you say internally funded, do you mean like you?
Me, Scott, we do member dues. We haven't done member dues in a long time. It used to be like $50, I think, every 6 months or something like that. And then
just buy everybody dinner at the end of it.
And then at some point, Scott and I just kind of started flipping the bill for stuff. I mean, and on top of, equipment, it's, we're paying for the website every year and all that stuff. And I think that's one of the reasons why we started the podcast, was that, well, if we do the podcast, maybe we get some sponsors and do that.
Yeah.
But then podcast is a lot of work, as you guys know. And we just didn't have the time between the full-time jobs, the paranormal gig, and now we want to be podcasters. It had to,
something had to give.
Yeah. So and until we can definitively say, this is paranormal, this is the evidence, and that we can do it on every case, it's, at least for us, it's going to be a out of pocket for us.
An expensive, time-consuming hobby.
And the last thing you want to do these people we're their last line of defense. They've called plumbers, they've called electricians, they've called the police. We're the last person on that call sheet, and they're at their wits' end. And I feel like charging somebody for something that we can't necessarily say is there or not.
Yeah,
I just feel like it's predatory, and I don't like that. And that's one of the reasons why we don't solicit our services to known haunted locations. It's like, if they want us there, they'll call us.
Okay.
It doesn't make sense for us to bug them, because we know because of past experiences from other businesses we've worked with, their phones are always ringing. And it's like, it's one of those things where it's like, I think that a lot of the ghost hunting, not all of them, but a lot of the ghost hunting community assumes, oh, this place is haunted, so we have a right to get in there. And that's just not the case.
So what's the big thing as far as support goes? I mean, obviously you guys are doing this because you love it. But how is there any support that you guys need as far as getting the word out, or support your channel, or support your Instagram or anything like that?
Yeah, but not really. Just, we put the information out there because it's fun to share what it is we're doing. We didn't do this to become famous.
Yeah.
We've had conversations with producers over the years that have reached out to us. Hey, we're doing this next show, and it's just not something that we're really interested in. I said we're doing the documentary. we're doing that on our own too. That's out of pocket. We've bought all the production equipment. We've learned the editing process and the filming process and everything. So not only are we filming and storyboarding and doing the historical data and the interviews and all that, we're also the investigators that are going to be on film too.
Yeah.
So that's the only way we would have done it. I don't want to take the data that we've collected and then give it to a bunch of editors for them to manipulate, you know, to appease sponsors and things like that. So,
Well,
yeah.
I'm hoping you guys. I mean, it's the love of the chase, right?
It really is. Yeah. You have to have a real passion for this
Yeah.
to do it, because it's downright boring sometimes.
Well, I hope you guys kind of keep going with it. I'm glad you guys got a whole team of people who are just as dedicated to doing this, and if nothing else, you're giving people peace of mind.
Exactly.
So I mean, that's all worth it. Trying to find some sort of explanation sometimes is more validating than just kind of letting people hang out there and not have a resource maybe to call or someone to talk to. So,
100%.
all right. Well, appreciate it. Casey and Nikki, thanks for coming on our
Thanks for having
podcast.
us.
And this was exciting to talk to you guys.
Great.
All right. Thanks.
You guys did awesome.
Yeah.